Hey folks, welcome to episode number 3 of our political election season series of our Peacemaker podcast. We're running this up until the week prior to the election. It's basically 7 or 8 weeks of interviews and possibly panel discussions on different topics. The purpose of this series in particular, the purpose of this podcast overall is to discuss controversial things. Things that Christians especially have differing opinions on and might go back and forth on and might potentially trigger each other. But when we get to know why we have those views and we can push back on each other, but we can do it in a humble way, a loving way, with a desire to understand each other, not necessarily a desire to strictly change somebody's opinions. Although that's not entirely wrong either, it just has to be done in a humble way. This season is about the election, it's about politics, and then we're going to take a break and maybe we'll tackle theological controversial topics. We'll see about that. Tom Sargent is co-hosting with me for the remainder of this election series. He was part of the first 2 interviews. I asked him to hop on board in being a co-host. Tonight's interview, or today's interview that's being released, which actually was recorded a week ago, is Jack and Lori Miskin. Jack and Lori are leaders in our church. They have been a part of True Life Church since the very beginning. They helped actually start True Life Church. They were a part of the founding team, the launch team of True Life Church. They have differing opinions than Tom Sargent, who's, again, on the conservative side. He was a part of it the last 2 episodes. They have differing opinions than him, but they also have differing opinions from each other. Jack and Lori, as a couple, have differing opinions on how to get to where they believe, same values, but different strategies to get there, and different ways of seeing the political process. So ultimately, the goal of this is to remind Christians, those who follow Jesus, that our identity is in His kingdom. Our identity is in Him. It's in another world, basically. But we are temporary citizens of this land, right? Wherever He puts us, whether it's China, America, Syria, we're to be faithful citizens there. Faithful to seek to bless the land in which we live, bless the people, and that means being a part of the everyday life here. But we're going to disagree on what that looks like, that faithfulness to Jesus in this land. We're going to disagree on exactly what that looks like. And so this podcast just seeks to find out, hey, how do you see faithfulness to God's kingdom in the here and now? And how do you see it? And why do you guys see it differently? And, I see an inconsistency in your view. Can I ask you about that? Can I try to understand why you have passion there or why you get triggered about that? That's the purpose of this. Enjoy Jack and Lori tonight. Next week is going to be Frank Martinez. He's a brother in our church, Puerto Rican brother, and a conservative. So going to get that side again. We're going to talk to him about his journey and just find out why he thinks the way he thinks about different things. Enjoy. Recording, always important. Tom, what happened in your head?
I am a part of a club, but the first rule of that club is I can't talk about that club.
Did your dog do that?
Indirectly. He wakes us up frequently in the middle of the night, and sometimes when I wake up, I have to go to the bathroom. And I hit my toe on the wall and struck my head on the corner of the wall. And had to go to the ER at 4 a.m.
Oh, no.
What?
Did you get stitches?
No, Dermabond. It glued.
Oh, yeah.
You got to go to the ER at 4 a.m.?
Yeah. Well, it happened at like 3:30.
Dude, did you go into work?
Yeah. Yeah, they got me out of there at like 5, so I came back home, then got up and went to work.
Oh, man.
Wow, dude.
If you're gonna do it, it's best to do it on a weeknight. Like a weekend, you could still be there, but
I might still be there. Yeah. No, it was pretty much had the place to myself.
Nice.
Yeah.
So Lori and Jack, what's your hope for this? What do you hope that this will kind of do for people?
My hope is that that we, that what comes out of it is the idea that we find our identity in Christ and not in a political process. And that I think that more times than not, there's certainly things that people, even Christians will disagree on, but more times than not, I think we agree on the end that we're trying to get to. I think it's a lot of times the means by which we get to that objective, and that, there's nothing wrong with disagreeing about those things and having a good, healthy discussion around how you achieve an agreed objective. But, and that, like, if we took that approach and had more civil discourse, we could improve upon the society we are visiting as humans on this earth, and move the ball forward, so to speak, and we'd have less of what we seem to be living in constantly, which is this polarized society.
So let me just pray, Lord Jesus. That's what we're praying. That this one interview, this one conversation, this one discussion helps. That number one, it's a reminder that our identity should not be in a Democratic Party, a Republican Party, or Trump or Biden, or any particular candidate, even any particular political philosophy. Our identity is in you, Jesus. It's in your kingdom, the kingdom that is going to topple all other kingdoms, all other parties. Those of us who are in Jesus are part of that royal priesthood, that chosen nation, your body, the church. And I pray that we could represent that kingdom as we navigate our role as citizens of America, and part of a republic, part of the democratic process, getting to vote, having discussions with each other. Help us to keep that in mind. And like Lori said, that I pray that for our church in particular, that when conversations come up, that we can express our opinions without being condescending towards those who disagree, without being self-righteous and judgmental towards those who disagree, that we can stand on our convictions, but also be open to having those opinions challenged, and be willing to look at things differently, be willing to just have conversations with each other where we're not walking away labeling each other and putting each other in a box. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right. So, Lori and Jack, you guys are a married couple. Let me get right into it. We won't get too like backstory, personal, how long you've been married. We won't spend time there. But I know you were married in the early 80s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And Lori, you said who's the first person you voted for?
Oh gosh. My gosh, Chris, I can't remember the first person I voted for. I should, right?
Well, you remember voting for Carter, you said.
I do remember voting for Carter. And he was really not a very effective president, but I really liked him as president. I do remember voting for Carter. I think Jack and I are trying to remember. I think I sat out a few of the elections. I think there was a period of a time in my life when my kids were really little. And probably when I was a new believer, I really was not very political at all. It just wasn't. And I think part of that was all the Christians around me, mostly my family, I have to say, because we did not go to a church that was very political at all or even talked about politics. But my family was very conservative, my brother particularly. And there was that link with, being a conservative is the only way, again, because of the pro-life stance. And that, basically there's no way you could ever vote for a candidate who wasn't pro-life. But I just never, in my heart, I just did not really agree with anything else that the Republican Party stood for. So for quite a few elections, I think I sat it out. I don't remember, voting. And then when I did vote again, I voted for Bush. And yeah, and I voted for him because of the pressure of my brother. I was not really happy about him as a president. I didn't really support a lot of his policies, but I will say this. I thought he was the right man for the job when 9/11 happened. I thought he did such an amazing job of bringing this nation together. And I think that as much as I didn't agree with a lot of his policies and stuff, and I did wish that I hadn't voted for him, I did feel that he had the nation's best interests at heart. I felt like even though a lot of what his policies were, I couldn't really get behind them. I did feel that he was my president. I don't feel that now at all. But at the time, I felt like he was trying to, even those that maybe didn't totally agree with him, he was trying to, be everybody's president. So, and then I think after that, we were in Texas at the time, and I think right around Obama, that's when I started really following politics a lot more astutely. And I think it was partly because we were in Texas, actually. I think that was our first election. We didn't vote the same.
I don't know.
I voted.
Is that why they asked us to leave Texas after that? No, I'm kidding. I don't know.
I think I voted for Obama both times. I don't think you did.
Are we talking about me now?
No, I don't think you did, right?
I did not vote for Obama either time.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Did you guys know that how each other were voting?
In that one, I would say probably, yeah.
Did you discuss it, debate it?
Not a lot. I mean, I just, I didn't, and I feel the same way about Barack Obama that Lori probably feels about W in terms of, I think I think he's a decent man. I think he's, he did what he thought was his best at being president. I felt like he tried to be, president for the country. I think that I didn't really agree on some of the tactics he used to try and move the country forward. And there's a lot of nuance in that, right? I think that I think that I like the idea of universal health care. I don't like the way it was put together in what became Obamacare, and so it's a bit, it's challenging because I do, I think there's a lot of, and without trying to make it, this 8-hour talk about healthcare, it's a very complicated issue. I think there are hidden costs to private, like the system that we have currently all over the place that I'm sure Tom deals with, in daily life. I do think that, if you were to look at me and say, do you think that people have a right to healthcare regardless of what their economic state is? I would say yes. How you do that is, I'm not sure how to do. And I think that's part of the problem with that agenda. To me, it always comes down to, well, what are the details of trying to accomplish this, and how does that kind of fit in with things? So
Lori, so if you're not voting, you didn't really come out then voting Democrat.
I didn't come out as a Democrat. Yes, I didn't come out
until Obama.
True life.
It was like coming out of the closet, the way you said it.
Well, I mean, the way you set it up in the beginning, you said it felt like it was like this big dark secret. So, right. So when you did start telling, like in those initial years of Obama, you're telling people that you did, what was the reaction that you were getting from other Christians?
Well, I will tell you, my brother and I, which is really very sad, we were very, very close, and we're not really anymore. And my mother has to say, to my brother, you can't put Fox News on if she's in the house. And she has to, we cannot talk about anything, and he's just, so the reaction is like what you would expect. The reaction is very, among Christians, it's very swift judgment. And among women, it's even worse. And if you start mentioning other things that is part of the Republican platform, they'll be like, oh, well, I only vote on one issue. I only vote on the abortion issue. So, I mean, I get that. I really do get that. I actually am a pro-life Democrat, although people don't think that they exist, but they do. And, but I think pro-life is kind of across the board. I don't think pro-life ends just at you don't want to give women reproductive rights. Like if you're telling a woman she has to have a baby, you know, that you as a society, you want her to have that baby, but then you're not aiding her in any way in healthcare. You're not aiding her in any way to help her raise a child. You're not, you know, you want to defund Planned Parenthood. So there's no like birth control for her. There's no place for her to go for a pap smear. There's no place for her to go for a mammogram. So, I mean, I think they're very complicated, big issues. And I don't think you can, I do think abortion's wrong. I do. I struggle with, do I have the right to tell another woman what to do with her body? I do struggle with that. But I think the focus should really be, especially as believers, our focus should not be so much on being so concerned about overturning Roe v. Wade, which looks like it may possibly happen now. You're going to get another conservative judge in there, very unfairly, but there is going to be another conservative judge in. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. You know, I mean, that may be off the table, but I just think that, you know, for me, I just couldn't just vote on that one issue because I just felt like, it always boils down to two things. How does it affect women and how does it affect children? You know, so I just think I do agree with universal health care. I think all child should have the right to an education, to health care, to proper nutrition. I think that those are some fundamental things that we're just missing in this country. And so what I was saying is I think like the Christian response should be more about like, well, what are we willing to do for those women that find themselves in those situations? Do we support like a solution to the pregnancy center? Are we willing to set up homes for women to have their babies and then help them get started or put the babies up for adoption? Like, what are we willing to do? You know, and I feel like, you know, I think a lot of it honestly falls on the church because I think the church by and large has really dropped the ball on a lot of issues. You know, I mean, the one thing Jesus talks about more in the New Testament than anything else is the poor. Yet how much of what we do as church bodies is really towards the poor? You know, I mean, I think mission work is important, but my gosh, when you've got kids going to bed in your own town, in your own neighborhood, in your own township, and they're starving, you know, I mean, I think that there's something to be said for that. So I just think instead of that whole broad stroke of just overturning Roe v. Wade, which frankly, I'm not sure it's ever really going to be overturned, even with a conservative judge. I think we need to take a bigger look at how do we support those women that are put in that very difficult situation. So, but having said all that, yes, that is always, always, always the judgment, is that the thought that you can possibly be pro-life if you vote for a Democratic candidate.
Hmm. And that's the main piece of judgment. So in other words, most of the time you're not getting judged because of you want universal health care and how are we going to pay for that. It's primarily from Christians about the abortion issue.
Yeah, it is. And the thing that's so hurtful, Chris, is that the judgment's usually pretty swift. Nobody ever really wants to really talk about, you know, why you feel the way you feel about certain things. And, you know, it's hard and it's hurtful because the judgment comes into play because what eventually, maybe I internalize it this way, but the way it feels is that we are now judging you and your faith and your walk with, you know, that's how it becomes. It's no longer just politics. It's now, and it is more, I mean, that issue is obviously bigger than policy, right? But it's less about that and it becomes more about you. And how you're missing, you know, there's something wrong with you and there's something wrong with your faith. And so I don't, you know, I find that the people that I have talked to about it, there have been like some Christian women that I've talked to about it, but I feel like it's, they know my heart, you know, and they kind of know who I am before we even have that discussion. And so it's like, it's a little bit safer and they kind of see like your side and they see why I vote the way I vote. You know, and like I've had really great conversations with Pam Hess, and we are both on very different, we're both in very different places, but we both agree very much on helping those that are disenfranchised. I mean, we both land there solid, you know, so yeah, there's.
So you disagree on what the government's role is on helping the disenfranchised, but you both agree that the church's primary role is to help the disenfranchised. Well,
I don't know what Pam's, I don't think we've ever really talked about policy to get there, you know, to help kids that are disenfranchised. But yes, we both do agree that I mean, wouldn't you say that too, Chris? I mean, don't you think the church needs to pick up some of
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Ab-
So, I mean,
Absolutely, and that's kind of one of the things that Tom and I talked about last week. And Tom, definitely feel free to jump in here. Is where does a like healthcare, like taking care of somebody who does decide to keep their baby? Is that the government's job to do? Is it the church's job to do? Should the church be stepping up more in that realm? Where the Republican Party falls short in that, should the church be stepping up? Where the Democratic Party falls short in here, should the church be stepping up?
That line of thinking was going to be some of my line of questioning a little later, but since it's been brought to the forefront, might as well just go with it now. The question that I had, I guess it would be for Jack, but honestly, it could be for both of you, because knowing both of you a little bit, I know that you at least seem to have a heart for serving the whatever you want to call it, disenfranchised, underserved, disadvantaged populations in our communities, in our area, with your various programs that you're involved with. So I assume that's something that's pretty close to both of your hearts. Would that be fair to assume?
mm-hmm.
Okay. So in that regard, just wanted to get your thoughts on how we've been doing that from both ends, like how the government doing it versus the church doing it. So sort of taking it back to the war on poverty days, like the LBJ war on poverty days. Since then, welfare programs got drastically expanded, and we're spending about $1 trillion a year on welfare programs. And just for perspective, our national budget is about 4.3 trillion, something like that. So about $1 trillion on welfare programs. So that's a lot of money invested. The question is, basically, how do we think that the government's been doing with that? Do we think it's all that much better after putting a lot of money into the problem? And if the government's really not getting the job done, what do you think? Where's God's role in that? How much is the church's role in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a huge question. I think that without knowing exactly what specific things go into the trillion of the 4 trillion, I think that I'm sure obviously there's a lot of things, right? That's $1 trillion, right?
Between like 72 and like the estimates like 90 something different welfare programs, and
yeah,
Medicaid is included in that, which is a big chunk. That's
right. So I think that there are parts of this that this is going to be a very long answer that in the end I'm not sure says a ton, but I think that what our society wants to be, I think with good ideas initially end up morphing into these things, right? Like the idea of the state taking care of older citizens is a post-industrial idea, right? That like Social Security and retirement is like that didn't exist in early America. It didn't exist in agrarian economies. It didn't exist, at the beginning of industrial economies because there was not enough wealth, right? That is a 20th century institution. And I think that there is, I want to retire as much as the next guy, but I think that and fortunately for me, what I do for a living is something that I can do because it's not physical, right? I don't have to be on a roof, or I don't have to be driving a truck. So I'm very, very much aware of an advantage. And, I in theory could do my job until, as long as my mental state allows me to, I could do it for a long time, as long as I want to. So, but there's a fundamental, idea about, the state taking care of the individual that I struggle with. Having said that, I do think that, there are clearly have always been and will always be people who cannot take care of themselves. And in terms of the war on poverty, has it been successful? It's impossible. Like, to me, I don't know how to judge that, because I can look at a couple of things. We spend an enormous amount of money. Generally speaking, my feeling is if the government does it, it's going to be the most costly, least efficient way to do things. My apologies to anyone who works in the government, but that's not where you go to get things done quicker, cheaper, and better. because there's inherent bureaucracy built into the institution. But having said all that, you look around and part of me says, well, is it working? Gosh, no. And then part of me says, what would it be like if it wasn't there? Right? It could. How much worse could it be? And I think that the hard part for me is I don't, in principle, love it. There's a part of my inner side that says, no, this shouldn't have to happen. But on a practical standpoint, like I look around and, whether it's going to, Lakewood or going to Asbury Park or going anywhere, or going to Newark, you see people are hurting, and there are a lot of people hurting. And so you're kind of like, well, if no one's going to do it, someone has to. And what has happened over the past 80 years is we have outsourced that job, or that part of our communal responsibility, to the government. And, I'm not sure how you walk it back. But, I do think, there are roles, and I think that that was one of the things that I really liked about W, and the idea. I don't think it played out the way anybody eventually wanted it to, but the idea of faith-based initiatives was, kind of an idea in what would have been a good direction had it been able to kind of really gain traction. Like, let's take public dollars and put them into private places so that we can let these people do it better than what somebody who's far away from an issue might do. So yeah, long way of saying I don't know.
So just to follow up on that, as a CFO, being a financially minded guy, someone who generally crunches the numbers, that would be fair to say.
Yeah.
So do you find? I'm not trying to. You sounded like very reluctant to admit that.
No,
there's nothing wrong with that.
It was the crunching the numbers.
We're not trying to out you here as a CFO, Jack.
I meant no disrespect by that whatsoever.
No, you didn't call me a bean counter, so that's good.
But for someone whose mindset is as such, do you find trouble drawing the balance between compassion and stewardship?
Yeah. Yes. There's always a challenge in making any decision involving limited resources, right? And so if you choose something, it means you don't choose something else, right? And so while, and I think that, those are, and I think that, again, not being political, but without being overly political, I think one of the problems that I have with the process, and it's a function of a lot of things, but, on the one hand, you say, well, I really think term limits would be a great idea. And I generally think that is a really good idea. The flip side of that is when you are constantly changing power bases and people in authority, you end up doing what politicians inevitably do, which is kick the can down the road. And so, what happens is it's like, well, I don't really want, and now I'm going to make every person who has ever been a teacher mad at me, right? New Jersey
Here we go.
has an incredibly strong and very powerful teachers union. I think what Chris Christie did was unbelievably courageous. The way he did it, I'm not quite sure I would, he's a bit of a bully.
We argued about this one, Chris.
But we lived under generations of a very powerful teachers union funding a very unbalanced state government. Our state was basically bankrupt, and he didn't cause it. He didn't do anything but inherit 25 years worth of problems, but he had the courage to say, I can't run the state without fixing it. And so he tried to fix it and got the venom of every person. And understandably, if I was a teacher, I probably would have hated him too. But very unfairly, I thought again, bully, very direct.
It was the way he did it.
But this was a problem that he just got handed to him. And he did it, what I thought was a courageous thing to try to deal with it for the betterment of the future. And he got his, what handed to him. And so it's one of those, it's always hard, because to make a decision and to value fiscal reality with compassion and what should be done, like it involves really hard, really tough choices that people don't want to make. And I think that like what happens is we are all the same, right? We're all rationalists. We rationalize everything, and we figure out a way to rationalize how we've dealt with it, but we've kind of not really dealt with it, and then we move it along. And it's one of those, like, the only two things I probably would never want to be is a pastor or a politician, because I don't have the tolerance or the people skills to do either. I just make everybody mad at me at the end. And,
Follow up on that, Jack, and then I want to give Lori a chance to jump in if she wants to. As a Christian CFO, do you think it's harder on you to strike that balance and say a non-Christian CFO who doesn't have the same, presumably the same morality pushes or compassion-based faith behind those decisions?
I don't know. Like, I think like I'm very good. I don't know how to answer that. I'm very good at compartmentalizing, first of all. So like,
So you're a heathen at work is what you're saying.
No, in my work, it's just like, I'm at a stage, and I'm, again, very thankful. I'm at a stage in my life where I don't care what we pick. I'm just gonna tell you what I think, and you do what you want with it. Like, and I think that that's a great place to be in. Like, I can remember being 25, and I never would have had the courage or the lack of care, like, the ability not to care. But I think that there are some things, like one or two, that come with getting older. And I think that wisdom, and I do think that understanding in the end, like, I really am very thankful for my faith and understanding that our God is not an algebraic God. He is an exponential one. Like his books don't have to balance because he's the creator, right? He can create things out where there is nothing. And so, like, a lot of problems that, frankly, on the surface, if in a political thing, I have no idea how to fix. Like, those are like, I just throw my hands up and walk out the door. Like, this is too much. But in the reality of, well, I don't have to worry about it, is where your faith comes in. And again, that is really easy for me to stay at the stage we are at right now. I wish it was always that way.
But I think too, like and this also I think comes with age and doing stuff. I think the fact that, God put me in the place to work with those Maple Leaf kids, and he does a soup kitchen. I think when you start to really put a face, and you start to really see situations, and you start to really see, he's friends with these people that come every Saturday. They look for him. They talk sports. They're and so that old expression, there before the grace of God go I. Like, it's just, when you see people that are down on their luck, they need some help. I think that has changed it for both of us. But I think for us, like we've talked about, our retirement is not going to be living in a condo in Florida. Like, we want to do something that's going to be impactful, and it probably will be something with food justice. But because if something's really, like, I think when something's really important to you, I could tell you the frustration that I've had over these last 4 years. It's like, I can't even anymore with what's going on in the world. But I think that if you can take like things that are important to you, kids are important to me, and so if you can take it and make one or two kids' lives better, if you can serve a hot meal on a Saturday and validate someone and let them be seen, those are things that I think it makes some of the other things, like the questions, seem a little less big. You're doing your part. And as far as like giving money to things that we think are important, like all those things, like we give money to the soup kitchen because it's really important to him, so it's all those things that I think once a situation becomes human to you, when you put a face on it, then it changes, and it changes a lot. And I think, that at least you feel like you have a little bit of power in making some kind of change. So.
Lori, can I ask a follow-up? Tom, cut me off if you had something you want to do. But
I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Lori, because we've been talking about the church really doing what it's supposed to do and not relying on the government. But you've been on the team, the committee in our church that decides who gets money when they're in need and they request it. Like, so Jack, who's been on our board, he's been an elder, decides X thousands of dollars is going to go into the benevolence fund each year. But Lori, you've sat on that benevolence committee with a few other people, sat down with people requesting money. And I know at times you guys have had to say no. What are some of the reasons, like, you've had to balance out compassion with stewardship, and how do you balance that out? What are some of the reasons why you've had to say no instead of just handing out money for people asking?
Well, it's really quite hard. Jack always jokes because I can say your dad does it too, right?
Sure. Yeah. No secrets.
Okay. So Jack was on it one time. We were in Relevant. It was the three of us, and Jack goes, I got a liberal who won't give any money. I got a conservative who wants to give everything. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. It's actually very, very hard. And it's not, unfortunately, it's not a one size fits all approach. We've had a lot of requests for counseling. That seems to be one of the biggest pushes. And so if it's something like that, I always feel like if it's members that are part of the church and they've been a part of the church for a long time, then, and they maybe need counseling or something like that, we usually are in full agreement. But we get a lot of requests from people that, maybe are coming for a little while, and, there's certain things, like they do have to sit down with us, and we do have to, kind of talk about things, why they need the money. I've always wanted it to be a little bit more proactive, because there's been, and that's like, I know I've talked to you about that too, Chris. Like one of the questions is, would you take financial counseling? And they almost always say yes, but then we don't have sources for them to get financial counseling, but it's very, very hard to balance. I personally don't ever, you'll be surprised, Tom, I personally don't ever want to give them all they request. And I don't usually, if they want to go to counseling, I feel they should pay a copay to the counseling center. Because I just think that sometimes when people have a little bit of stake in the game, they're going to, especially with counseling, they'll maybe work a little bit harder at it. But there was one case, I'll just say this quickly. There was one case of one of the moms from Maple Leaf requested some money. And I texted, and I said, I can't really be a part of this because I don't feel I could be objective. And they
had a relationship?
Because I had a relationship with her, and a very good relationship with a couple of her kids, especially her oldest son. So I felt like I just couldn't really be very objective. And and your dad and John were fantastic. I sent it to him, and I said, I can vouch for her. I think she's really trying to get her act together, because I really think over the years she has been. But they were gracious. They were gracious, and they gave her all that she requested. So, but it's not easy, Chris. It's because I guess the hardest part about it is there's X amount of dollars. And I always feel like if we give, some of the requests are really high, and if we give it all out at once, then, where there's a need for someone that we really want to fill, there's no money left. So we go back and forth, but in the end, I think we've, by and large, always make the right decision.
Yeah, and I think it's a good picture of how, when the rubber hits the road, the stereotype of somebody on the liberal side is just want to give money away and not think about where it's coming from. But when the rubber hits the road, you do believe in teaching somebody that to fish, not just giving them a fish. You want them to have some skin in the game. And Tom and I were talking last week about the stereotype of somebody on the conservative side who wants the economy to be flourishing for their own selfish gain, when a lot of times that's not the case. They believe in conservative policies because they believe that's the best way to lift somebody out of poverty. So when you get to know somebody's story and you get to see where they're involved, you see that things are a lot more nuanced than the stereotypes out there. Well, I'm curious, Jack. You've been your adult life. You've been primarily, I don't know if you're a registered Republican or you've just leaned Republican, but that's safe to say, correct?
So this is the compelling part, right? So I'm gonna, really blow your mind. So the first election I voted in was also 1980. I will preface this by saying I was a college student. I was not a Christian, and I was really pretty far out there. I also voted for Jimmy Carter.
I loved Jimmy Carter, though.
I don't really, I can't really.
I thought he was fantastic.
I can really remember having this fear of the fakeness of Ronald Reagan because of the fact that, he had switch parties. He was an actor. I didn't think he was sincere. And so as it turned out, I was wrong. I think Jimmy Carter is one of the best human beings that ever walked the earth. I think he was a pretty bad president. I don't think he was a great leader in terms of leading the country. Having said that, I would, if I could be 1/100th of the human being he is, I would be very blessed. I think by the time '84 came around, I had seen the error of my ways. I was now working. I was in a giant accounting, worldwide accounting firm. I was firmly entrenched as beginning to become the man. And so, I from that point, from '84 through now, I've pretty much I've never changed. I became a Republican, registered Republican. My parents were dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, which is also part of my earlier story. But I became a Republican somewhere in the early '80s. I wouldn't describe myself as a Republican. I actually, not knowing what Tom was going to ask, I kind of actually went through this checklist of the big issues. I looked at Pew and looked at the big issues that they think voters are facing in this coming election. And I kind of went down and said, well, would I judge myself liberal or conservative on each issue, and going everywhere from abortion to the economy, all the way down through 12 of the issues. I didn't like 2 of them. I threw those 2 out. So I ended up with 10 because more soapbox, but I thought Supreme Court is decided already. So it doesn't really matter because that will be finished by the time. Doesn't matter what I think. It'll be a clear majority. And I'm not sure I wouldn't have been Republican anyway, but as well as on coronavirus, I think, I have a soapbox that I think it's all been politicized. And I think I'm not sure, forgetting about degrees, who could say they were for that, right? Everybody's against it. So I thought that's to say that you're going to vote based on that. And I get there are different approaches and I just think that's a bit of a red herring. I don't think that belongs in that debate. But I ended up with 10, and I was actually 5-5 conservative versus liberal, which I think kind of fits. I'm comfortable with that. I would describe myself as a moderate. I would have to self-identify as a Republican, but I am certainly not a pull down the red ticket all the way down the list.
He has voted for Democrats before, and he may do it again.
You never know.
There's that.
You never know. So anyway, so.
And does that make you every time election comes up, Lori, does that, and the times that he has voted differently, during the Obama years, did that make you bristle that your husband is, or did you guys, at times, did it make you bristle? Was it here's another one? Are you,
Well, they get some pretty.
We just cancel each other out.
We agree. And they get very, the discussions get very heated, for sure. But I think
do you learn from each other?
What's that?
Do you learn from each other?
I think
yes,
I would say yes. I think we do. But I think that, again, I really do believe we're both coming from the same place. We just disagree on how you get there. That's real. That's the bottom line. I don't have a problem with big government. He does. I feel like corporations left to do, I feel like they're never going to do the right thing. I don't believe in trickle-down economics. I don't think it helps them. There's a lot of that I just don't believe. I wish we didn't have to legislate everything, but I think given to their own choice, man does not do the right thing. So I do believe a lot more, but I do, I know Jack's heart, so in the end, we do have very lively discussions, but We had a very lively discussion about the 3-point shot in basketball. I think it ruined the game. I think it ruined the sport. He thinks it's great. So, you know,
I think it
there's a
even the
lot
field.
of, we disagree on a lot of stuff.
Tom, any other questions for Jack, specifically with philosophy or policy questions?
No, I think most of the stuff I had for Jack was wrapped up in the financial aspect of, you know, how he felt about things, the role of the church versus the government in taking care of underserved communities, as well as the balance between compassionate outreach and wise stewardship of the money. It's something I kind of wanted to get his take on, as I thought his position as a Christian man and as his profession, he would be uniquely qualified to weigh in on. Aside from that, I mean, I guess we could. No, so most of the other policy things I that came to my mind were more rebuts to stuff Lori was saying, but I don't want to get into that, so we'll leave that out. And no, I don't. I think those are the main policy questions I had for Jack. But after you talked about your checklist of areas where you were on one side versus the other, were there any areas that you are now more on the liberal side of that you weren't a couple of years ago?
Let me look.
Or the opposite, more where you're on the more conservative side where you weren't a few years ago, or
I would say probably the only one would be the idea of racial and economic inequality. I would say I've probably moved in, I don't know, the last so many years. I've always been, I learned a lot in our racial discrimination or racial class, life group that we had. I always held a belief that, I still do believe this is a great country. I think it's the greatest country there is. But I felt like, I could personally identify, because in many respects, my life has been a bit of an American dream. I grew up really, really kind of poor and was able to get educated and get a college degree, get a decent job. And I felt in my heart, well, that, that's available to everyone. And I think, as I've learned, not just through that class, but through life, there is this head start that you get being, male and white that I didn't ask for. And I never thought I had, but by looking at, the real world of other people who, had just as much potential, but maybe didn't have that opportunity. I think that, I've probably slid a bit left on that one. My first reaction to the words white privilege were probably very negative and probably very, somewhat angry. And
We did argue about that a lot.
I've come to a very different place. I don't think, I don't think that's what it's describing as somehow making me less. I think it's, it's referring to a structure and a paradigm that, everyone, because of either gender or race, does not have the same starting line. And I can accept that and not feel threatened by it, but, not get, that's probably someplace I was not at all. I would say most of the rest of it, I pretty much, just like the button-down shirt, I've been kind of there for 30 years, haven't changed a whole lot.
And just Lori, are there any areas where being hitched to Jack for so long has brought you a more toward a middle or right stance, more so, not necessarily to that side, but more so than you were early on?
I think if anything, I've become more left than, I think I started in the center. I think we both were sort of in the center, and I think I've become more left as I've gotten older, and Jack stays kind of in the center. So yeah, no, I mean, I really, I mean, like I said, I think we respect each other enough to, you know, it's one of the things I love about my husband. It's never been, he never tries to put me down because I have a different opinion. He never tries to mansplain things to me why I'm seeing it the wrong way. You know, I mean, again, it's like, it's our politics. I mean, I am informed. I have to say, I am very informed. He's informed. But in the end, you know, in the end, it's like, it's so far down on the list of the things that are really important to me, you know, it really is. You know, and it's always heightened during this season, and then it kind of, you know, fades a little bit more, but I
Lori,
don't, what's up?
do you think the judgment that you've received from those on the right has served to push you further left?
Yes, for sure.
Like it becomes about, well, if you're Christian, then you must think that. And I don't think I don't think it's healthy for the country's life, but I also think that in so many ways, it distorts the truth of who Christ is, because the last time I checked, he came to this earth before there were things like America or parties. He came to save the world, and he didn't do it through a program. He did it through his sacrifice. And so, like, I feel like, and I get, you know, this is the time we live in, but I feel like the politicizing of faith has come with that unfortunate unintended consequence.
Yeah.
And for Lori, just something that I thought of, the experiences you described with judgment from fellow Christians of your political views, do you find that to be a mostly universal response in the Christian community? And I'll preface why I ask that, because while Christians do tend to have more conservative views, if you look at the percentages of Christians voting one way or the other, it's not like a 90-10 split. It's more like a 60-40 split.
Yeah.
So, and especially in a blue state like New Jersey, I mean, there's got to be plenty of Democrat voting Christians in New Jersey. Maybe not in the immediate Spring Lake, Manasquan area,
Yeah.
but you know, throughout the state. So to me, it just seems like, you know, you would have had to accidentally run into some people who were sort of in the same lane as you, so to speak. So do you think it's more like that negativity bias, like the people judging you stand out a lot more than the people who you've come across who might agree with you? Or is it just you haven't found the people who agree with you?
I have not really found or had discussions with I will sit there in a Pilates class and hear these women say things like, yeah, I don't like some of the things he says, like he says bad things. I said, he says bad things. He says like one lie after another, but my 401's in really good shape. You know, I mean, I hear a lot of that like all the time, you know, and so I feel like I'm always in this space where, you know, if you think a little bit differently than the people you're around, you cannot and I'm not gonna, you know, jump in. And I mean, I'm friendly with these gals, but I'm not going to jump in and get into a big conversation with them.
And I was going to say, is it safe to say that the women in the Pilates class are not necessarily speaking, like there's people who voted for Trump for X amount of reasons, and then there's Christians who voted for Trump, and I know they overlap for sure, but is it safe to say that, you know, people who say that about their 401k kind of thing, they're not all speaking from a Christian perspective?
Oh, no,
correct?
no.
Okay, I just want to clarify, just in case.
They're speaking from very upper middle class kind of perspective.
Well, do you think, and maybe we can, Tom, unless you got any last ones, but this would be my last question before we wrap up. Do you think, in an effort to not make politics such an idol and such a divisive issue between Christians and the church community, do you think part of what is required is for us to recognize and respect that each person is going to have their own unique, visceral response to something? And, you know, like Lori, you have you use that word, visceral response to Trump and his character, even if policy-wise he lined up with everything. If he was like dishing out money to the poor left and right, it sounds like you would not vote for him.
I don't think I could.
And there's other people who, for them, somebody who says that they believe in a woman's right to have an abortion, for them, it's a visceral response. I can't even, everything else is so secondary to that thing. And for other people, it's universal health care. Do you think part of the instead of trying to talk each other out of having those visceral responses, do you think part of it's just respecting the fact that, okay, that's your thing, that's your trigger, I got mine and you got yours, and do you think that's part of it?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's largely, and that's why I think so much of this is very nuanced. It's like it's really like that's why it's hard to actually talk politics with people, I think, unless you really know them, because you can batter things around and not really understand the heart of a person. But when you understand the heart of a person, if you understand what their backstory is, if you understood what my backstory is, you would understand why I have a real problem with men that are misogynistic. I was abused as a child. I worked in the fashion industry and had to have many men say inappropriate things to me. That's part of my story, right? So if that's part of your story, you're going to react really strongly to seeing a man in power that is so dismissive of, I think he's very dismissive of women. I think dismissive of a lot of things, but that's going to be part of my story, listen, I have to say, I just want to say it again. I do really struggle with the abortion issue. I always have. I struggle with it. I struggle with it but my feeling is, in a lot of ways, I don't really think Roe v. Wade's ever going to be overturned. And I think even if it is overturned, it's always going to be a part of our society. I mean, abortions have been around since the Victorian era. It's always going to be a part of our society. And I just think the response has to be different. I've had friends that have had abortions, and I don't think any of them, two things, make the decision lightly, and it doesn't have long-term effects. So I don't know. I mean, it usually is, though. But I agree, Chris. I think that we all need to sometimes just really take a pause and really try to not react and maybe say a little bit more, why do you feel that way?
Yeah.
Or why do why are those statistics important to you? Like, that's why I would say to Tom, why are those statistics? Why is it always statistics? Why is that important to you? Because people are going to arrive at things in different ways. Like Tom is very analytical. He's a scientist. So that's always going to be important to him. But that's how like my son's a scientist. So if you talk to Mark's fascinating to talk politics with. But, if you talk, his whole thing is environmental issues. If you talk the environment with him, it's a very different, slant. So I think, though, and we can all become, I think, more enriched if we're just a little bit more patient and a little less heated about stuff, and be okay where people arrive at things, I guess, is what I want to say too. I mean, I definitely have, I think I'm informed, but I definitely have, a way more emotional side with stuff, but I think a lot of people do. And I think that's important, because if you're emotional about something, it activates you, it makes you really think about what is really, really at the core of who I am. What's really important to me? What do I really want to see change? And again, for me, it will always be women, and it'll always be children, so, where can we build our society? If, like, I want to see that group protected, so I don't know, but I think it's sad, Chris. I feel like, there's certain things we just simply can't talk about,
Well, that's what we're trying to do here. So I appreciate you guys being on here.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, I think that it's just politics is just one more thing. It doesn't, like, you kind of, yeah.
Why don't you close us in prayer with what you were about to kind of say? I mean, unless you want to say
Okay.
it.
No.
Pray, but I feel like what you're about to say is a great way to close us.
Yeah, hopefully it won't cut off like the last time when I prayed with Andrew.
Poor Jack.
God, we thank you, God. We thank you for who you are. And as much as we are just in awe of that, we thank you so much for who we are in you. We take all of our identification and know that other than being your creation, what we are is irrelevant. Like the person, the job we have or the thing we do or the view we have is really, in the big picture of things, unimportant compared to why you made us and what you want for us, which is to have a relationship with you. And Lord, I would just ask that you use this podcast as well as the rest of this series to show that in you is where our identity should be and our strength should be, and all of our worth should be, and that it's not going to come while we absolutely have to live here and we have to deal with real problems. And for so many of us, they are very, very overwhelming at times. We do, because of our faith in you, take great comfort in the fact that in the end, you are our Father, you are our Creator, and you are the leader of us. And I just thank you for this time. I ask you to please bless the rest of this series and help people to hear hearts, not specific statements, in your name. Amen.